Chris Sawyer, what a pleasure to see you and have you on this alumni interview series. You're one of the most distinguished alums of the Yale Divinity School, and you've had a remarkable career in law and conservation. And we'd love you to start with what motivated you to go to Yale Divinity School and then on to your law career. Please give us a feel for that.
Mary Evelyn, thank you. While you were talking, I was thinking I probably should stop right here. That was such a nice introduction, so I appreciate it. Um, I grew up in Winston-Salem. Our family was very involved with the church, so we grew up, but it was always faith and intellect at our house. Dad and mother became good Presbyterians, like most good Presbyterians, but one being a Baptist, one being a Methodist, and so that's where we ended up. And I was active there, and the ministry was important, and it was something else that became important as we got into Vietnam, which was, in terms of my student experience, was 68 to 72 at the University of North Carolina. And we started with corsages for girls at football games and coat and tie. And by the time we finished in 72, it was long hair, nothing but blue jeans and some t-shirts, work shirts. And so, America changed dramatically during that period. And I was convinced that the church had a real role to play in it. And so that I was impressed with that and watching it. So anyway, I found out my senior year that there was such a thing as the Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship, which if you earned that, you would get your first year only, but all of your first year expenses paid. And essentially because of that, you also could go to most any divinity school you wanted to go. But you had to say you're interested in ministry, and you also had to say that you weren't interested enough to pay your own way. And guess what? I could answer yes to both those questions. And I thought I would end up in law, but I was pulled to the power of of ministry, and really the power of the Lord and all of that, and all the good that can come out of it. Though we've seen a lot of bad comes out of the wrong version of it, but. Anyway, so I applied for the fellowship. Fortunately for me, I got it, which meant that I could postpone the law for a while. And I would say within 6 months at Yale, which I loved, at the Divinity School, I had decided I wasn't going into ministry, mainly because my interests were too broad, and I needed a bigger field that I thought I could play in than just one church, even though I admire people that run churches just right at the top. The ones that do it well are extraordinary human beings. So anyway, I finished at Yale, but at Yale I ended up taking a very eclectic path, and at the end of it, I'd spent a lot of time with philosophy and also higher education philosophy, but also about Wittgenstein and Kierkegaard with Paul Homer, and spent time with Sister Margaret Farley and four other people doing independent studying, which was just an incredible educational experience. And the bottom line was that I knew I was going to law. And so I directly left YDS after 3 years in M.Div and went to Duke. But by a year or two after that, I realized that what I did at Yale Divinity School was I became much more mature, and I did conclude that the greatest experience that I had at YDS was not only meeting the people there and being able to have the luxury of studying all of that, but what I found was that I just had become much more articulate, not only orally, but also I wrote a whole lot better, and that I understood myself better, I understood my faith better, and that gave me a solid core of values that I've evolved over the last 50 years, but boy, what an incredible advantage I had because I had all that. And, that's something that anybody can get out of going to YDS if they go. And those are just enormously important skill sets.
Well, what a fascinating introduction to this ministry. And as you say, coming out of the same era I did of the late 60s and early 70s of civil rights, the anti-Vietnam War, and seeing the moral force of religion there, I think
Yeah.
probably motivated both of us deeply for environmental concerns and the broader issues of our planetary survival. So now, give us a feel then as you went into the law and also the area of conservation. You were chair of the board of TPL and you served on that board, Trust for Public Land, for many, many years. And you also did extraordinary conservation work in Georgia and particularly in Atlanta. So give us a feeling how this work with land conservation and law and these great institutions also inspired you to give so generously in service to our collective future of good land trust.
Well, I would add one other thing on the faith journey. I had an uncle Carl who graduated from YDS, who taught Greek at Wake Forest for 25 years. And Carl never had a class more than 12 students, didn't drive, didn't use the telephone.
Mm,
Um, but when he died at 80 something, there were over 300 people at his funeral because he was just such an extraordinary human being. And he
mm,
always told me, he said, Chris, I am a minister without a shingle. And he says that's a role that we all should be playing if you're fully in faith, the Christian faith.
mm.
So that has always had a huge meaning to me. Not only is it okay to think big, which I kind of do more naturally sometimes, but just your touch with other people can have such an impact on their lives and give them encouragement and be positive and want to do good things. So anyway, that was part of the combination of the learning I've received early in my life, which I so appreciate. But going to conservation, part of that's just that. I had become president of the Atlanta Bar when I was 39. So at 40, when I stepped down, I was, after doing bar work for 10 years, which is something I learned a lot from. And we're grateful for the opportunity. But I just said, well, done bar work, and now I'm gonna go do something else. And by that time, I had decided, really what you like being is outdoors. So you should go do something that makes the outdoor better for everybody. And so I'd already known about the concept, the Nature Conservancy, and then I all of a sudden heard about the Trust for Public Land. And literally in a 2 week period of time, I was asked by TNC to go on their Georgia board, and then the Trust for Public Land announced that they were opening an office in Atlanta. And so they had hired this Rand Wentworth to come in and do it. And so I met both people, the chair of the TNC board and Rand, and I was crazy about Rand. He's a Yale grad and turned out to be just a savant genius. And so he and I co-founded TPL Georgia, and I would think since then we've probably done $400 million worth of conservation projects in the state. Rand went on at my urgings to become president of the Land Trust Alliance, and my penalty for that was going on their national board for 9 years. And then TPL, after a couple of years of running the Georgia program, they put me on their advisory board. And then in 94, I went on their national board in San Francisco and then became the chairman in 96 and did that for 8 years. And during that period, we grew TPL considerably. In fact, when we finished, we had raised just under $1 billion and had conserved about 100. I'm sorry, just under 1 million acres is parklands in America. And for those that don't know, Trust for Public Land, we conserve land for people.
Mhm.
Nature Conservancy, it concerns land to protect the endangered species, flora or fauna, as they like to say. Both are fabulous organizations.
Mhm.
So anyway, I got into that, and you say, well, what was the thing about the parks that really pulled you? And I said, well, I just think parks are one of the greatest things in America and in the world. And it's because everybody gets to use them. So, it's not just for rich white males. It's for any and everybody. I would tell you that our distribution of parks has been scaled towards the wealthier sides of our community. But over the last 15 years, TPL has led the effort to change that and get parks more equitably distributed. And I think we're being very successful with that. But at the end of the day, it's a gift to everybody in the community. And so not only that have I learned over and over and over again. I mean, everybody likes a good park. And but in addition to that, the people that want to create parks for the most part are people that love something so much that they're willing to give up their time to improve the life of others, whether it's by saving a historical center like the MLK birth home, which we saved at the Trust for Public Land, or it's a historical monument like the Brown v. Board of Education high school in Kansas, which we saved, so that school will be a marker that this has happened in America and this is where it occurred. Which also I learned early on with TPL when we did these historical markers that the first one was up in Lexington, Massachusetts. We added about 100 acres to the Minuteman Park there, and the fellow that the ranger that gave us the introduction when we went up there for the opening, he explained, he said, y'all don't understand this place. He said, you got to understand this is where the Revolutionary War in America comes from. And he says, if you don't think that's important, just understand that we're being you've got waves and waves of Eastern Europeans coming in here now all the time because the wall is down and they're looking and saying, did it really happen the way we read about it? And they come here and they can touch and feel history. And that sends them back confident that they can do that. So there's a lot of learning in doing parks. And then there's a lot of play, a lot of recreation, a lot of health. And so all of those things are great things to do. I've now, I don't know how many thousands of people I've helped bring into all of this, but I've never met anybody that came in and said, boy, I really regretted setting up all those parks with you guys over the years. They all look at me and say, thank you for giving me one of the most wonderful things I've ever been able to participate in my lifetime. And so, that's why I continue to do it. There's no downside, there's no regret. And you got a lot of happy people when you do it. And also, by the way, to do all the things I've just described, you got to build a community. And that's something where church people, really can help us. In fact, that's one thing that led me to try to build something between YDS and the School of Environment up there. Just because I kept going to all these openings and I never saw any people people that went to church participated in it, but I never saw any church leadership being, extended. And I kept thinking all this time back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, said, what in the world is wrong? I mean, I was also clerk of the session for Presbyterian Church in Atlanta around 91, I think, large church. And so why aren't we doing park work? I mean, what else gets more to who we are than that? It's about creation, conserving the land in a wise way, and its history, its justice, it's all those issues. And so anyway, that's what we tried to do, and we're now accomplishing that, I think, at YDS with Mary Evelyn and John's leadership in great ways. So
Well,
it's a little bit rambling, but hopefully it gives you
no,
a
it's
flavor.
fantastic. It's such a great story. I've worked with Trust for Public Land as well, and Will Rogers and a whole group that was so impressive just to underscore what you've said, that it's very much land and people, it's inner city parks in our urban centers and so on. And as Ken Burns said in his series, this is one of our greatest creations, right? Parks.
And right now, Mary Evelyn, we're going a step further in many ways. But again, when I was chair, and by the way, I was chair when we hired Will as president, so I was real proud of that. Still am.
Yeah.
But anyway, but sometime while I was that 8-year period, the head of our New York office came in to San Francisco at the board meeting, and she said, "Got a problem? Got to get involved and make this work." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "There are 300 schools in Manhattan that don't have playgrounds."
Mm.
And I went, "What?" I mean, because I was, as you might imagine, I was 12 years old before I figured out that there's reasons to go to school other than to go out on the playground and recreate. So I lived for that hour. It was great. I couldn't imagine being it. So anyway, we have worked on that. Many people very wisely, and and I've had tangential involvement, but I'm proud of what they're doing, and I'm a cheerleader for it. And I've been very involved in Atlanta because now we finally earned the right and the respect that we now go in and work with over the last 5 years, 6 years have evolved where we go in and work with school systems, and basically we say, hey, um, if you let us use your open space and your playground um, during non-school hours for your community, then what we'll do is come in and help you and your students and your teachers and your principals plan what they want in their playground. And we will then, if we get to where we need to be, we will go raise the money to build the playground, and we will build it for them. And so at the end of the day, the kids get a much better playground that reflects their interest because again, they plan it, but when they're planning it, we um, at the end of given all the options, and it's a multi-day process. But anyway, each child, whether you're in elementary school, junior high, or senior high, is given $500 of play money, and you have to negotiate with your classmates about what you all are as a group going to achieve. So there's a lot of pedagogy in the system that's built up. But anyway, this thing is just taken off, and part of the motivation for it is that we believe at TPL that everybody should be within a 10-minute walk of a park. That's health requires that, community requires that. Just being outside in nature requires that. If you're stressed, it's been now shown by biomarkers in your mouth that if you go into a park or open space in 15 minutes, your stress level goes down 15%. So can you afford not to go do that today? And the answer to that is probably not. Okay. But if you don't have space to go do it, then how do you do it? You have to not do it. So anyway, we're trying to change that. And we've now got our GIS is so good that we now put out a ranking every year of the cities with the highest percentage of their citizens living within a 10-minute walk of a park. And cities don't question the GIS information at all because it's so reliable. But they're also now competing to be at the top because those places with the most parks that are most accessible are the cities that become most successful because that's where people want to live.
Absolutely. So let's take all of this remarkable experience with national organizations, local dedication, etc., over to our divinity school here. So you became a member of the Dean's Council and then chaired it for many years. I think it was from 96, and for 14 years you were on that council, and then you were emeritus chair the first time in YDS's history. So you've devoted yourself to, let's say, first the renovation of the buildings at YDS, and then you planted the seeds for and helped drive the action towards this living village. So you've been very instrumental for YDS in its renovation. And I have to just say, you encouraged us when we first came, Chris, and we're so grateful to you and your wife, Julie, and your wonderful daughter, Frances, who is here at Yale, that you got why religion.
And Glenn was also there at Yale, our son.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yes.
they
Yeah,
are.
exactly. So you've got all kinds of Yale presence here. And so we're very, very grateful for that. But why don't you give us a feel for when you were on this board and chairing the Dean's Council, what you were trying to do at YDS?
Well, I was called by the dean back then. I think it was Tom Ogletree, but and that was 1995, 96, right around there. And so I was 45, 46. I was right in the middle of the most active practice years at the large law firm that I worked with for 30 plus years, 35 years. it's still associated with. But anyway, I said they invited me to come up, and so I said, well, that'll be fine. And I will have to admit, though, the real motivation was my niece, Kate, had just been accepted at Yale and was going there. So I figured, well, I'll go up there and see what the Divinity School looks like. I hadn't been back since I graduated in 75. I went back in 76, had not seen it since then in 1996. So I said, well, the good news is I'll have dinner with Kate. That'll be great. And I'll also be able to catch up about the Divinity School. And so I went up and I was really outraged, I guess would be the correct word. It was stunning to me, the physical condition of YDS at that point. And it made me wonder the physical condition, which, by the way, was not limited just to YDS. It was the whole university, but YDS being one of the two least economically advantaged schools at Yale, probably had the fewest resources to deal with it that were theirs to use. And but I just was so outraged. And it was so bad that the second time I went up, I was so excited because I went running into Tom's office and Tom, the dean. And I said, "Oh God, thank goodness y'all finally started rebuilding this thing." And he said, "Well, what do you mean rebuilding it?" And I said, "Well, I see all the scaffolding out there on the steeple." And he started laughing. He said, "Chris, that's scaffolding, and we're not renovating or rebuilding anything yet." I said, he said, we lost a column up there last week. It fell 100 feet right in front of the church. And so that's up there to keep us from allowing us our building to, damage somebody, if not kill them. And I just looked and I just shook my head. And I said, well, the other thing, what about the windows? It looks like somebody is trying to get that paint replaced. And he said, well, we can't. No, it's just chipping off. And I said, Tom, it's lead-based paint. So given my, at that point, 15 years of real estate experience as a lawyer, I said, the only way you can, if you don't take it out, the only way you can do it is you got to encapsulate it with more paint. You need to be painting all these windows, not letting the lead go into the ground. So anyway, they had problems. And again, Yale had real issues, and thank goodness Rick Levin came in, and David Swenson, who ran our endowment, he came in and started us in a different direction at Yale. But I was just, when my Uncle Carl went there, Yale Divinity School was known as the Vatican of the Protestant Church. And so I grew up with that image of it. It was a very important institution worldwide for the Protestant church and for the Christian faith more broadly than just the Protestant church. And I don't know, I've gone through life now trying to figure out how do you know when you have a calling? And I don't know. I've now done this since 1996. So what's that, 29 years. And I've always known that I was not going to quit doing it until that school was rebuilt. I was embarrassed that we had allowed it. And I just thought that, and I hadn't done anything to help prevent it. So I was as guilty as anybody, or as responsible as anybody. But to me, if you believed in Christianity and you'd been given this asset that was so important to the world at one point in its history, to let that recede was just so wasteful to be sinful. And it's given up such a marker. And so anyway, I've stewed over that concept for almost 30 years now. And people have said, well, we need to get the divinity school out. We need to get faith out, spirit out. It doesn't need to be at a secular global university. I mean, we don't do that. We're intellects. We're all about truth and facts. And, at a personal level, I've always thought, well, guess what? It's a pretty strong force in everyone's life if it's tapped in. And if you're tapped in to do something like that, it directs you. And so I've been very in my own mind about it the whole time. And I also knew that until we could get the physical plant renovated and rebuilt and solve some problems, that we weren't going to get where we needed to be, simply because who would give you money for new programs when you were taking such poor care of gifts? At least ostensibly, it seems like you were taking poor care. So anyway, that became real important to me, and I never have expressed it quite this way to my colleagues at Yale, but I will on this tape, just so other people can stay tuned for their own inner motivations. And I mean, obviously, I've done all this as a volunteer. There's been no compensation whatsoever gained for it. My family and I have loved doing it, and we're very pleased with where it is right now because I'm about I'm about done. But the 14 years I was chairman, there was never any question to anybody that we were going to rebuild that school. I mean, there were questions to a lot of us about whether we would be successful, but in terms of having a core belief and a direction and a goal, uh, I never had one. And if the deans, and I've worked with six deans at Yale Divinity School, so it's taken six deans to get where we are now. And I can tell you the current one and the last one, Harry Attridge and Greg Sterling, have been fabulous. They've just been fabulous. But they knew in their hearts that they were going to be rebuilding those buildings because they were going to lose their DACs if they did, the Dean's Advisory Council. They were going to lose a good number of their members if that was not the goal, because that's what a lot of us have been there. I mean, George Bauer, great donor for the new building, he came that same meeting, and it was interesting in '96 because he came up. They said, "Well, George, we really appreciate it if you could come over because you're a neighbor and your wife's been involved here, and um, if you could come over and talk to us about helping us create a new advisory council." And so George came, and we met that first day, and we've been close ever since. And but they asked him to talk about faith and work. And George started that, and Miroslav Falk, all of that sort of started about that time and got some economics behind it, and that was good. They asked me to come up because by that point I was chairman of the Trust for Public Land. I had just become chairman, but anyway, they said, "Come up and talk to us about the environment and whether it's relevant to the church." And I said, "Yeah, I think I'd be glad to do that." So anyway, I was younger and knew less, but I knew enough to know that those two should be connected. So that was the beginning of environmental discussion at YDS back then. So anyway, that gives you a sense of why I got involved and why I've stayed involved. And I've been at all the important junctures along the way. I mean, I think probably and also because of my environmental work, they asked me to join the leadership council at the School of Environment in 2001. So I've been on that board since then as well. But by 2000, I think it was like 2006, it was either 6 or 8, but we've gotten Mary Evelyn and John in, and we were excited about that at both places. At least those of us who saw the connection were excited about it. And what builders have they proven to be, and what advocates they've proven to be, and what wonderful people they are. So anyway, that's been great. But in 2008, I'd maybe it was 2006, but anyway, I'd convinced Gus Veth and Harry Attridge that we should have a joint meeting of the two councils, Environment and Divinity, to talk about our life together. And so anyway, we did that. They were shocked. And so anyway, we shocked that they approved it. We had it, and there were about 125, 150 people there for Saturday night dinner. And they had asked me to speak because they said, "You're the one that understands this. We're not quite sure what we're doing." So, but anyway, I got up and I said, I go home, I'm chairman of the board of the largest park creator in America, park developer. And I've realized what we do is de minimis. I mean, it's wonderful work. And we certainly greatly increased the platform since then, but and the impact. But I said it's just very limited. And I said TNC, largest one in the country, and it's now working on the world. But it's also in terms of land protected and conserved, it's hardly anything. And as a relative matter, I mean, I said back then I could look out of my office on the 46th floor in Atlanta, and I knew all the figures at that point for TNC in terms of acres saved and protected and all that kind of stuff. And I could look out my window and I could see more real estate value the mile out of my office in only one direction, not east, west, north, and south, but just one direction that was greater than what we were doing. So my first thought was, well, we got to get the real estate community on this. But the second thing was the church. Where are they? And so anyway, we had that dinner and it was very successful. They republished the talk and it became, I think, Spectrum's leading requested magazine article they ever did. Because essentially I said, the environmental organizations can't do this by themselves. We need their science, we need their facts, we need their skills, but they need our spirit and they need our touch to people. And I looked at them and said, 85% of the people in the world believe in a God. Some of them have fairly mixed views about what that God is, but that's the way it is. So it's a spiritual role. So I said, we've got to tap into that because otherwise we're never going to get climate change to turn around. We've got to address it that way. So anyway, and I do remember after I finished, Gus was up on the platform with me, and he stood up, and people were generous with their enthusiasm for it. But when I turned around to walk to my seat, Gus embraced me in a big bear hug, and he whispered, he said, "Thank you, Chris. I now understand why we were doing this tonight." And I said, well, guys, tell me, I'm on the front lines on the environmental stuff. We need the army that's behind us with all of these churches, and they need to get into it because they can do so much themselves. So that's been a goal also throughout. And by 2008, we were moving, and then we were renovating the building. And by, I think I stepped down something like 2016, maybe as chairman, 2018. At that point, we had renovated the entire historical campus and had launched the living building. And the living building also came out of all my work in the environmental area, because what I was trying to do with the faith community, I was doing with real estate. So I was there when, through the Urban Land Institute, I was on their global board for 9 years, I think, but that's the leading commercial real estate group in probably the world. And anyway, I got them to move towards green. There were a lot of people who wanted to do it, they just didn't know how to express it. They still were thinking that killing the Clean Water Act was a good idea. We had discussions, and I think I convinced them that was was a fallacy thinking. And so anyway, they all of a sudden started talking about green resorts and green developments and green homes. And then we got into LEEDs 1 and 2 and 3, and all of that was very successful. I worked with a lot of clients and a lot of friends that were doing LEEDs work, convincing them that was very important. They needed to do it. Great organization, great leadership, and all of that. And so anyway, that process, and I also was on the board with Amory Lovins at the Rocky Mountain Institute, and Amory had proven in 1972 by building his house in Aspen, Colorado, that you could build a house that didn't have an HVAC system out there with the incredible swings of temperature, that didn't have an HVAC system, but just by good engineering, good design, and deep thoughtfulness, that you could keep the temperature in that building at 72 degrees year round. So once I started finding out about the living building, which was early on, I knew that it could be done if we had the right people working on it. So anyway, that's
Well, it's a
time to
great,
take a break after all that. So I don't know.
it's a great history, and I was there at that joint meeting because
You went to all, you were there, so you were leading it. Don't just say you were there in meetings, you were leading most of them,
No,
much
no,
more so than I was.
Gus was kind enough too. Asked me to speak at that meeting, and it was a great beginning of a joint venture between the two schools, which is still ongoing. And
Yeah.
I think that we can, maybe conclude with the sense that this has been quite a journey for sure, and very beneficial to YDS, but also to the School of the Environment, and your friendship with Gus has been very important, along with Harry and Greg Sterling. So
I would just one last point. When we got the major part of the school, our residential stuff was, we had taken it off the main quad, so we had to fix residential, and it became clearer and clearer that um, and Dean Sterling has done such a great job in so many things up there, but he wanted it so that it was paid for, so that we could deliver housing to our students cheaper than market rates, because as he repeatedly says, is they can't afford market rates. So which I understand. And so we wanted to get something, and then there were, commercial student housing experts. They came in and said, "Oh, we can hit it," but again, you back at market rates, and we couldn't figure out how to raise money. We had all the problems with started with the Catholic Church and the pedophile situation, but then, the attendance at denominational schools was going down, and anyway, simultaneously with all that discussion, I got involved with the Candida Foundation, and they're building a living village in Atlanta. And I suddenly realized that that was the answer, because for a lot of reasons, but one was that it was who we are, that we're charged to help nurture and protect the environment. And living at carbon zero is about as good a thing as you can accomplish right now. Also, taking care of your water from rain and snow, so that you're pulling it that way, so you're not taking more than your share of what's given on almost a daily basis. That was important. So I knew that I knew two things. One is I thought that that would be one way that we could get something done. So I know three things. I thought we could raise the money based on that. I thought people would really resonate with that, and step up, because they would realize how important it is. I also, from the environmental side, going back to the 2006 or 8 talk, we needed the environmentalists and the engineers and the architects and the real estate and the commercial people, none of whom, when we started this, had ever heard of Living Village or living buildings at Yale, which we discovered. So we needed all that stuff that they have access to. And so they supplied it, which was great. But the thing that we got is just the amount of publicity this living building has done for us already. And it's only had students in it for 2 weeks. But I mean, even just shoveling the first spade of dirt back in October a year ago, that had 4 million hits where people actually read the article for a groundbreaking. So I can't imagine what that number is now, but that is spreading the word widely, and it's opening the eyes of everybody, but particularly people that are of the faith community, that, wait a minute, this does make good sense. And also, the third thing that I really wanted to achieve by recommending that we go this route and suggesting it, because I was the one that brought it up, identified it as what our vision should be, was that I I knew that once we built that building, we would be locked in to eco-theology for the rest of history of the Yale Divinity School. There's no way you can do the building the way we've got it without teaching about eco-theology and how all that works, and the philosophy behind it, without studying the humanities that relate to the environmental issues. And so now it's there, and it's us. And I'm so excited about the way it's being embraced and has been embraced. And so thankful for so many people, but especially for Greg with his leadership.
Well, it's a great achievement, there's no doubt. And as we've all been saying all along, the living building and a living program. And that's what we're
That's
looking
exactly,
for
there you
going
go.
forward. We need it in the
That's
curriculum. We need the students to be learning in all kinds of ways about the environmental issues. So it is a very foundational moment for the school and for Yale as a whole. And we thank you for your
right.
incredible dedication all these years to make this happen. It's going to be a great moment of both dedication, but as you say, ongoing revelation of the work that is to be done ahead.
Well, it's been a great gift to me and the family, and I'm pleased that we're at this marker, and I can't wait to see what else comes out of all of it. And we still got phase 2 to do, so we can't quit quite yet, but I'm optimistic that we'll get the journey done.
That's so great. Well, Chris, many, many thanks from so many of us at Yale, not only at the Divinity School, but across the campus, I think. And this is the kind of dedication we need for our world right now, and especially for the next generation.